Good afternoon. I'm Peter Cowie, the Dean of the Graduate School of International Relations and Pacific Studies here at UC San Diego, and I'd like to welcome you all on behalf of Chancellor Fox and my colleagues on the faculty, staff, and the student body here at UCSD to a very special event. 2 weeks ago, this campus was replete with commencement ceremonies, and at every commencement ceremony, the speaker usually had a theme that said, "Take the lessons of your education and use them to go forward, learn continuously through your life, serve society, dare to be innovative." Well, those commencements could have been a testimony to the reason that we're here today, the life of President Jimmy Carter. And it's for that reason that this is a very special day indeed. We're fortunate that the great friend of UCSD, UC Regent John Moores, is also the chair of the Carter Center Board of Trustees. And it's my great pleasure now to introduce John Moores.
Thank you all for coming. My role here is pretty simple. I get to introduce probably the most beloved American alive. I have one other responsibility, and that's to start a video. It runs about 10 minutes, after which I'll bring President Carter in, and he'll have some exciting remarks. Let's cue the video.
The most serious challenge to the world in this new millennium is a growing chasm between rich people and poor people, where we don't understand them, they don't understand us, and there is a lack of concern about their plight.
For more than 2 decades, the Carter Center has worked to bridge this chasm, inspired by the belief that all humans have a right to live in peace and to live in a healthy environment.
I think the most pertinent umbrella that you could put over the Carter Center's programs would be that of human rights. And since my earliest days in the White House, I have seen that phrase expanded in its meaning.
Today, the Carter Center has turned this broad concept of human rights into action through a wide range of programs that help to resolve conflict, plant the seeds of democracy, and ease suffering from hunger and disease. These programs have brought hope to millions of people in more than 65 nations around the world. Their impact over the past 2 decades, along with President Carter's leadership in negotiating the Camp David Accords between Israel and Egypt in 1978, led to his being honored with the Nobel Peace Prize in 2002. Today, the need for the Carter Center's work is greater than ever.
We bring the best minds in the world together to look at specific problems that we have identified. And therefore, when we mention 3 A's of Carter Center work, we talk about action programs, we talk about an academic link with Emory University and other prominent universities around the world, and we talk about access at the highest levels of government, and create an action plan that will actually result in a change in lives at the village level.
The Carter Center work is so different. We get into the villages, we see the people, we get to know them, and also we get to know how much we can help them.
Health and poverty and despair and war are wrapped up together in one cycle. And what we are trying to do at the Carter Center is to break that cycle in as many places as possible.
Sometimes breaking the cycle requires personal diplomacy. For example, in North Korea, Jimmy Carter's talks with the former dictator Kim Il-sung helped to avert a new war in the Korean peninsula.
That trip quite literally brought us back from the brink of war. He's a great emissary and a great peacemaker, and that was a marvelous example of making peace.
In 1999, President Carter brokered an agreement between the governments of Sudan and Uganda. Since then, abducted children have been returned to their homes, prisoners of war have been released, and diplomatic exchanges between the two sides have been resumed. In response to a long-standing invitation from President Fidel Castro, he boldly reached out to open a dialogue with all sectors of Cuban society, including those whose voices are seldom heard. In a televised address to the Cuban people, Mr. Carter spoke frankly about the 43 years of animosity between Cuba and the United States.
Les damos la bienvenida como nuestros amigos. Muchas gracias.
He expressed the hope that Cuba would one day say, "We are ready to join the community of democracy."
The accomplishments I'm most proud of are those in which the Carter Center, through its international election observation work, has contributed importantly to real transitions from authoritarian dictatorial regimes to elected civilian democratic regimes. Nigeria in 1999, Indonesia in the year 2000, East Timor in the year 2000 and 2001. The China Village Elections Project is the largest elections activity of the Carter Center. We're now into year 4 of working at the most basic grassroots level to try to build in democratic practices within China.
The center also has monitored some 36 elections around the world, among them the historic vote in the West Bank and Gaza. In the Western Hemisphere, working through a council of former presidents and prime ministers, the center has helped to nurture new democratic governments. In 2001, the center was able to persuade the Organization of American States to include a democracy clause in its charter.
We started out with elections as the primary step, the first step in creating strong democracies. Now one of our core programs is addressing corruption and increasing transparency in countries.
But think just for a minute, how many of you have been victims of corruption?
Guyana is probably the best example of an initiative in which we are trying to bring all of our different programs into play.
We have indeed produced a national development strategy in cooperation with our Guyanese partners. It includes the economic, social, and political development of the country, which we think is a model that can be emulated by others.
As a non-governmental agency, the Carter Center has leveraged the work of its programs through help from a wide range of voluntary supporters and partnerships. Through this powerful combination, the Carter Center has built a record to be proud of.
We fight disease in the most underserved areas of the world.
The Carter Center is waging successful campaigns against crippling diseases, including trachoma, schistosomiasis, and lymphatic filariasis, also known as elephantiasis.
We're working with forgotten people who have a forgotten disease.
As an epidemiologist working on river blindness, it's my job to look at the disease, how it affects the population. In 1994, we looked at some villages where about 20% of the children were positive for onchocerciasis. In 2001, only about 1% of the kids were infected. So to us, that's a great indicator that we're making tremendous strides in progress.
I'm personally proudest of our work in the guinea worm eradication program. We have, through this program, helped millions of people in developing countries to improve their lives, and in the process we've invigorated ministries of health.
As a supplement to larger water filters, the Carter Center has taken the lead in distributing 9 million personal PVC pipe filters, enabling nomadic peoples to filter their polluted water.
This also impacts communities. People can farm, farmers can go back to work, children can go back to school, and overall the communities are healthier.
Today, cases of guinea worm have been reduced by 98%, and hopes are high that it will be the first disease since smallpox to be defeated so decisively.
We know that mental illness is a disease as any other.
Rosalind Carter continues to work in the mental health field by bringing together national mental health leaders and by promoting mental health journalism through a program of the Carter Center.
It can be diagnosed, it can be treated, and almost everyone suffering from mental illness can be helped, and most can live more normal lives.
You can't build and maintain peace built on human misery and empty stomachs. When they're empty stomachs, you are creating a politically explosive situation, and you won't be able to maintain peace for any length of time.
The Sasakawa Global 2000 project is one in which we work with farmers in their fields. We do this by showing them how to space their crops, how to use hybrid seeds, how to use fertilizer, how and when to weed. Very practical interventions that they can take that then increase their yields 3- and 4-fold.
As a result, in 1997,
This is very impressive.
Ethiopia was able to export grain for the first time in its history.
We have over half the world's population living on less than $2 a day. Unless you can give hope to those people and fulfill their aspirations, you're going to have difficulties in achieving democracy and resolving conflict.
The Carter Center can approach peoples and communities all over the world, and it has an advantage over state leaders.
We have people here who truly believe that they can have an impact on people's lives, that they can make a difference in the field of human rights.
I am African, I come from Kenya, and working with the Carter Center in a way is like working for my country. Well, every once in a while I think back about the implication of eradicating guinea worm disease, which has been around since biblical times. When you think about it, you stop for a while and you're like, oh my goodness, this is incredible.
All of the work of the Carter Center is filled with compassion and, if I can use the word, love. So I think that what the Carter Center is doing is presenting the finest aspects of life, moral values, and hopefully America's concern about others, putting its best image in the forefront of the minds of literally millions of people around the world.
This is a huge honor for me to have an opportunity to introduce President Carter to this university, to this city, which is the home of the National League West leading San Diego Padres. Let me skip most of President Carter's bio because I think most of us are quite familiar with it. He's the farmer son that went to Annapolis, became a nuclear engineer, became a state senator, a governor, a president, a Nobel laureate, and certainly, as far as I can tell, has become the leading advocate for human rights in my lifetime. There's no easy way past that to introduce this fellow, so I decided to bring along a prop. There's a guinea worm in here. This is a pretty rare fellow. In 1982, there were about 3.5 million people in the world that had guinea worms coming out of them annually, and this is pretty painful. This thing looks a little bit like angel hair pasta. When it comes out of a body, it's quite painful. This particular guinea worm was in a farmer not too many months ago, a fellow named Al-Hassan, Ghanaian. He'll never have guinea worms again. And the reason is that the Carter Center, and this is a project that was so outrageously audacious that only somebody like Jimmy Carter could have conceived of it. There are only about 10,000 cases of guinea worm left in the world, and it's going to be gone, hopefully in the not too distant future. Most of the world's guinea worm now is in Ghana and the Sudan. Sudan has been a hard place to get into, but one way or another, we're going to get it done. And there are a number of other diseases that the center cares about, all of which have been enthusiastically endorsed by President Carter. He's made more of a difference in the world than anybody I know, and it's a huge honor that I'd like to call President Carter up.
Well, it's nice to be introduced by my boss, John Moore, who's the chairman of our board, and I'm just a member of the board, so he's my boss. You don't ever know what kind of introduction you're going to get. First time I've ever been introduced as a father of guinea worm, or the embalmer of guinea worm, I don't know which, but I'm very delighted to be here with you this afternoon. My job, assigned by John, is to tell you a few things about the Carter Center that maybe weren't on the film, and then to spend what time we have available answering your questions. This time yesterday I was in a deep canyon in Colorado, suffering in a raft, catching brown trout, and it's a delight to get out of there and come to be in this delightful place with you. Rose and I do have a good time in addition to enjoying the work of the Carter Center. After I was involuntarily retired from the White House by the 1980 election by one of your fellow statesmen here from California, we didn't know what to do with the rest of our lives. I was one of the youngest survivors of the White House, and the first concept we had of the Carter Center was to have a miniature Camp David, a place kind of in isolation near a presidential library where people who had an ongoing war or a threat of a war could come and let me be the mediator between them and to prevent or end a conflict. And we still do that on occasion. And out of that original idea has come what the Carter Center is. We've been blessed in many ways by having the flexibility of travel and the prestige, obviously, of having been the first family of the most powerful and greatest nation on earth. And we still take advantage of that. We have a decided way to go into a country. For instance, if you were working for the World Health Organization or the United Nations or something like that, if you wanted to go into a nation, a country, to deal with the guinea worm, you would probably go in to the Capitol, and you would rent some office space, and you would send maybe just 10 people there, buy a few pickup trucks and motor scooters and so forth, and then you would wait until you could get an appointment with the Minister of Health, and you would tell them that you were there to work on guinea worm. And that's a normal way to do it. We don't have to do that. Since I have been president, I send word in advance to the president of that country. I'm coming in to your country, and I want to meet with you, of course, and your prime minister, and your Minister of Health, and the Minister of Agriculture, and the Minister of Transportation, the Minister of Finance, and I want to, in fact, the whole cabinet, and I want to talk to you about how we can eradicate guinea worm from your nation. And we sign a contract, sometimes literally and sometimes verbally, a memorandum of understanding. You do this, we will do that, and that's what has made the Carter Center so effective. That's one aspect of it. And in dealing with guinea worm plus river blindness, which you've heard about, lymphatic filariasis, which is well known as elephantiasis, you saw the picture, and trachoma and schistosomiasis, and dealing with agriculture. So no matter what it is that we want to do in a country, we start at the very top. And on a first trip that I make there later, after we get our program going, I quite often go with Rosalind, and we invite the president of a nation to go with us to a village or to an area where we are helping them triple their production of corn or wheat or rice or millet or sorghum, or treating people for river blindness and so forth. And the president of a nation gets deeply involved in the process. Another very good advantage that we have is that we don't put our name on anything. There are no stamps anywhere in Africa that says this is a Carter Center project run by Jimmy Carter. My name's not on anything. We call it Global 2000. So the president of a nation and the village elder can say my Global 2000 project has cut guinea worm 99.7%, or my Global 2000 program has increased the yield of corn by 300%. So they get credit for it. And it's not an artificiality at all. It's because they deserve the credit for it. That's the most important single aspect. Many of us in this room, all over the United States, all over Europe as well, have a strong tendency to underestimate the quality of people who are suffering in Africa and other places. It's almost inconceivable to me, having been there many times, to Liberia, for instance, to realize that over half the folks in Liberia now are living, if you can use that word, on 50 cents or less per day. It's inconceivable. How do you pay for shelter and clothing and food out of 50 cents a day? The fact is that you don't have anything left over for health care or for education or for self-respect, for human dignity, for hope. And that's what we try to address. We've formed a few policies that we follow. For instance, we don't send in a vast array of foreigners into a country. When we want to deal with say, agriculture, in Ethiopia, as many as 400,000 farm families, we only send in one foreigner. And the contract that I've already mentioned, that's negotiated, the local people furnish all the workers. We teach them how to deal with a group of families. And we furnish what we call extension workers with a bicycle. And they pedal from one farm to another to spread the technique of increasing food production. As a matter of fact, we even require them to pay for the bicycle out of their low salary. But it gives them a sense of ownership and self-respect and human dignity. And one of the most startling things that I have learned, and I hate to admit this in a way because I've been president, I should have known, is that the folks in Ghana and Burkina Faso and Niger and Liberia, which I've already mentioned, and Kenya, you saw that on the screen, and Ethiopia. In these villages that only have $1 or $2 a day at the most, are just as intelligent and just as ambitious and just as hardworking, and their family values are just as good as mine. That's something we tend to forget. We tend to underestimate them, but you give them the slightest image of what they can do to improve their own lives, and they adopt it with the greatest sense of alacrity and competence, and also appreciation. We expanded our programs greatly. We try to interrelate all of the different facets that come under the broad umbrella of human rights. In America, we generally think of human rights as a thing guaranteed, things guaranteed in the U.S. Constitution: freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of press, and so forth, freedom of religion, trial by jury. Those are very important. But in many countries, those things are not all that important when the children are starving. And they know that when they have a group of 5 children, that they'll be very lucky if 2 or 3 of them survive until they're 5 years old. So the right of a human being to live in peace, the right of a human being to have a decent shelter at night, the right of a human being to have some modicum of education or health care is also a human right. So we try to bring all of those things together in one basic framework within which the Carter Center tries to do the best we can. Well, I've already mentioned one aspect of the Carter Center's work that I think is unique, and that is going to the top in getting the whole government to join with us in a partnership. The other one is that we go into the most remote areas of the world, the most destitute, the most forgotten, the most ignored, and where the suffering is greatest, in the desert areas and also in the jungles. We're actually in the villages working with them. Habitually, lately, we have personally monitored an average of about 11.5 million people whom we treat so they won't go blind with rubber blindness. And we have dealt in the most individual cases. I have an inability to forget the first guinea worm case I saw. We had heard about it, and we decided to try to address the problem. But we went to a small village that has about 500 people, about 3 hours drive from Accra in Ghana, capital of Ghana. A village about the same size as Plains. We have about 600 people. And 2/3 of the total population of that village were lying in a square under some shade trees. In my honor, the President of the United States was coming to the village. And there were a number of others I found out later that couldn't drag themselves out of their own huts to the village square to see the President. And I saw this beautiful young woman over there. She was about 19 or 20 years old. I thought she was holding a baby in her arms. And when I got closer, I saw that it was her right breast that was all swollen. And a guinea worm was coming out of the nipple of her breast. And later, I was told that she had 11 other guinea worms coming out of her body the same year. And luckily, we were traveling with a very wealthy man from Pakistan. And he was so overwhelmed that he gave money to dig a deep well and put on a pump, and it was done in a few weeks. Well, that village has never heard of guinea worm since that time. That was 18 years ago. And almost all the villages in the world that had guinea worm will never see another case. We're dealing with a disease called trachoma. John Moores and I and some others, Rosalind, in the central part of Ethiopia last year. As a matter of fact, we'll be going back again for the first part of next year. Trachoma is a disease which you've seen on the screen. This caused by filthy eyes. We had trachoma when I was a child in Georgia. It was pretty bad because the black flies, house flies, were so ubiquitous. They were everywhere. And we had practically no sanitation. We had an outdoor privy behind our house. My daddy owned the farm. But it was the only privy on the farm. Toilet with a hole in the ground. And all the other folks who lived on the farm, if they had to urinate or defecate, they would go out in the bushes or around the edge of the house and do so, and it bred flies. This is the way it is in Africa now. And so we have found that one way to treat trachoma is just through sanitation. If you go into a Dinka village or Maasai village, from a distance you see these beautiful little children, and your first impression is that they're wearing some kind of glasses, eyeglasses. You get close and you see it's a ring of black flies constantly sucking moisture from their eyeball. And they never know about brushing them away. They come right back. And they're not familiar with washing faces. So we teach them to wash their face, first time in life. And we try to do something about the flies. We teach the people how to dig their own hole in the ground and put a screen of some kind around, rags or bushes. And they now have a latrine. Well, sometimes we were quite startled. The first year we started doing this, we thought we might have 5,000 latrines built, which is a lot of latrines. And we didn't realize that the culture of Africa makes it completely taboo for a woman to relieve herself in the daytime. So she can be seen as an absolute total disgrace for a woman to be seen urinating, for instance. So they do it inside the house if they have to, and they try to wait till dark. The women saw in Ethiopia that digging a latrine would give them one of the finest elements of women's liberation in life. So we have now, at the end of March, they, not we teach them how. They had constructed 286,000 latrines. And we'll soon not have any more trachoma in that big area of Ethiopia. It's where the Nile River commences. Well, these are the kind of things that the Carter Center does. While we're in the nation dealing with the diseases I need not mention again, or helping them grow more corn or wheat, if they have a serious problem, we try to help them with it. If they have an ongoing civil war or threatened civil war, then we make ourselves available to negotiate or to mediate so that we can end or prevent a war. And if for the first time in their existence, the nation decides to have a democratic election instead of an oppressive authoritarian government, we volunteer eagerly to help them draft a constitution and write the laws and set up an election commission so they can have a good election. And then we go in months in advance, and then I'm always there with Rosalind and others on election day and few days before and after. And we help make sure the election is honest and fair. We just finished our 62nd election in January in Palestine. And we'll be going in just a few more days to Nicaragua to help them have an honest election. Those are the kind of things that the Carter Center does. And we do it only because people like you provide us with the resources to do it. But we can take a small amount of money and greatly magnify its benefits because we deal with at the top level. We understand that there are very few outsiders. The people themselves do the work, and we quantify our results. We can tell you almost exactly how many cases of guinea worm there are now, how many cases of onchocerciasis or river blindness there are, how many latrines we've built. And instead of being known as a father or protector of guinea worm, in the future I've now changed my title to the greatest builder of outdoor toilets on the world. So that's my claim to fame, and that's why I'm here today. So that tells you a little about the Carter Center, but if you have any questions you want to ask me or John Morris, we'll be glad to answer them. And John will call time when it's time.
I don't think anybody has any questions for me, but we do have a microphone over here, and it occurs to me, President Carter, you've had an interesting life. So I think you probably heard most of the questions a couple of times. Let me throw the first question out. You've been very picky about biting off, accepting projects. That is, we're not going to bite off more than we can chew. That seems to be the philosophy. Malaria is a huge issue in the third world. Can you say a few words about what your thoughts are?
All right. Well, we've been pretty strict, as John says, about taking on more projects than we can handle or finance. And we are about to eradicate guinea worm. Walter Cronkite said 98%. We actually are down to 99.7% now. And malaria is a persistent killer of people. Primarily children under 5 years old and pregnant women. They're the prime ones that die. And in the past, it's almost been impossible to control malaria. In fact, it has been impossible. A few years ago, they developed impregnated bed nets. All of you are familiar with bed nets if you slept anywhere in the tropics, just to keep the mosquitoes from biting you at night when you're trying to sleep. An impregnated bed net goes one step further than that. That is, you put into the bed net pesticide that actually kills the mosquitoes when they land on the bed net. But you had to re-impregnate the bed nets every year. And that is extremely tedious, although it only costs about 50 cents for the pesticide. But to go back into a village every year and do it all over again is an enormous project. Well, now they have a bed net recently developed that will last about 7 or 8 years. They impregnate the fibers of the bed net before it's woven. And so we now have a way, we believe, to eliminate malaria in a big region. And we've been looking for a country that would do their share and let the Carter Center coordinate the project and make sure that the project is successful. So Ethiopia, one of the poorest nations on earth, as you know, and a very large nation, 75 million people. I mentioned the Trachoma project in Ethiopia. We are now planning, we just had a budget hearings, to try to prove that in the entire nation of Ethiopia, we can completely eliminate malaria. That's something that never has been done before, but we believe that with John Moore's leadership, we can be successful. Thank you, John.
One more question from me. Somebody made me put this around my neck, and I'm not sure exactly what this is. Maybe, can you explain to the audience what this handsome adornment is?
I think it was mentioned in the film, but the way that we try to use the simplest technology to address a disease, and with guinea worm, which you probably saw in the film, I've forgotten, the guinea worms are in eggs that are inside of a little flea, and if you strain each drink of water, you take out the guinea worm, and then you can drink the water, and you won't get guinea worms inside your body. But in many parts of a country, we can't get there. And some people are nomads, like the Tuaregs in the northern part of Niger and Burkina Faso, so they spend all their lives on horseback. And the Tuaregs found that if they took a little tiny piece of filter cloth, it's a very high quality filter cloth that DuPont helped us develop, and you wrap it around the end of a reed, and then you can suck water through that, and all the water is filtered. So with the help of Norway, we got PVC pipe. It's just a 1/4-inch pipe, and they helped us get 9 million of these pipe filters. And in areas that were still at war, in southern Sudan, for instance, we could send the pipe filters in with instructions, and then they could use the pipe filters instead of having a filter that had to go all the way across the top of a jar or something. So this is what John is wearing, and when he goes to Ethiopia or in a place like that that still has guinea worm, it's hard to find a place now with guinea worm, then he can suck his water through that pipe, and he won't get guinea worm.
And I will. Question.
Mr. President, thank you for being here. It's a privilege to hear you. It seems that in the so-called war on terrorism, that the work that the Carter Center is doing is a much more effective approach than what our current government is doing. And I'm wondering if there's any way that either the Carter Center is involved or could become involved in helping us move from what we're doing now in Iraq and Afghanistan into a more productive approach.
Well, since the first day I was in office, you know, we've never dropped a bomb or launched a missile or fired a bullet. And we tried to promote peace and let people...
I worked in the government when you were in office, and I
Thank you for that. So I think the best approach is to let people around the world know that we really care about them, and not only just tell them that, but prove that that's the case. When people are in total despair, if they can't produce enough grain to feed their children, and they know their children are going to die, or when they are afflicted with preventable diseases, like I need not mention all over again, they have a tendency in a modern day globalization era, when information is available to a lot of people through various means which I need not describe, they now compare their own life with that of the outside world. Whereas 20 years ago, they only knew what happened in the next door village. Now they know what happened all over. And they get increasingly inclined to compare, why am I living like this when we see such gross waste and affluence in the outside world? And they tend to react in different ways. Some just work harder, and that's a small portion. Some have an inclination to blame others for their plight, which is quite often legitimate. So the first thing they do is to start a civil war. They want to overthrow their own government. And they are very susceptible to being seduced by those that would recruit them to lash out against the outside world. And their most fervent and maybe their most intelligent and ambitious and adventurous young people are subject to being recruited as terrorists themselves. Your family's suffering back home, nobody's helping them, nobody cares about them. Why don't we punish the people that are responsible for it or that are not helping us? So that's part of it. I think the best thing to do for our country to combat, or certainly to minimize the threat of terrorism, is to let the rest of the people who are suffering in the world know the United States of America, as part of its greatness, as the only superpower, is dedicated to the things that I mentioned earlier that describe human rights. The United States of America is constantly dedicated to peace, not preemptive war. The United States is dedicated to the alleviation of suffering. The United States is dedicated to building democracy and enforcing international law. That's what the Carter Center tries to do in a very small way. And I think it's one of the best ways, hopefully in the future, to minimize the threat of terrorism.
Thank you. Next question.
Mr. President, thank you very much for being here. I have a tremendous amount of respect for the work that you do, especially regarding elections and building democracy in countries that previously have not known democratic systems. So I have a few questions for you on that subject, but they're all interrelated.
I'll take my choice.
My first question is, what are the primary challenges that you've seen in your broad-ranging work in building democracies? Are there common issues that the Carter Center has to address when it goes in to do party-building activities? Secondly, is there countries that you don't view that the media is free enough or that the leadership of the country isn't dedicated enough to having an open election that you won't participate and you'll say, no, we're not going here, you haven't met our threshold criteria? And then lastly, as a follow-up for your work in Palestine at the beginning of this year, if you could provide us with your assessment as to the health of the political process in Palestine at this time.
Okay. Well, we have to be very cautious about what countries we enter to help with elections, not because we're afraid we'll get hurt, but because there are criteria that have to be met. First of all, we don't go into a nation to help with an election, which is a very costly thing in time and money, unless we feel that the country really needs it. If we believe that the country can hold a decent election without our presence, there's no need for us to go. So all the 62 elections we've ever been in so far have been where I believed that if we weren't there, the election couldn't have been successful. That's one thing. Secondly, we have to be acceptable and trusted by the incumbent government, the ruling regime, and all the major opposition parties. Because we can't go in a biased way, we can't go in with any prejudice toward one party against another. We have to be completely unbiased. So that's another very serious obstacle to overcome, because quite often if the ruling party is determined to cheat, then they will not permit international observers like us to come in. So that's another kind of a screening process. The third one is that the country has to have, in our opinion, a central election commission that's adequately balanced and fair, so that if the Constitution and laws and rules are adequate, the election commission is not going to cheat, and that they'll be adequately fair. If those criteria are met, then we could seriously consider going in. Another thing that we insist upon is that all of the candidates who are qualified should have equal access to the media, because they don't have much money. And if they qualify to run, then they should have the same amount of time, roughly, on television, if there is television, and radio. So you can see that there are a lot of preliminary screening processes. We get a lot of invitations every year, and we can only handle about 5 each year. So those are the criteria that we use. I'm generally there 3 or 4 days before the election's held. My wife and I visit as many polling places as we can on election day. We send out teams of 2 people all over the country, and they monitor the same amount, and they report back to me by radio or telephone during the day if there's a problem. If there's a serious problem, I go to the Central Election Commission. or to the president of a nation or to the prime minister, and I say, this is a problem, you need to correct it. If I think they make an honest effort to correct it, okay, if not, I call a press conference. And BBC is there, and CNN is there, and so forth. And that country does not want me to condemn the election because it casts a reflection on the country. I need not go into detail about that. After the election is over, then we have another big problem, and that is to get the victors and the losers to accept the results of the election with some adequate degree of grace. And so this has been a problem for us in some cases as well. Now, to get down to the Palestinian election, we've been in Palestine for the last 3 elections, 10 years ago, a year ago, and this year. I would say that they have been among the most successful elections we have ever monitored because they have a central election commission that is absolutely impeccable. These are the most distinguished Palestinians that can be identified. They are former college presidents or former chief justices of the courts and so forth, and they would not do anything that might bring discredit on their own personal reputation. So we've never had one iota of problem in the conduct of the election or the acceptance of the elections, no matter how controversial they might have been among the Palestinians themselves. They have elections under the most severe handicaps, and that is that the Israelis totally dominate the entire West Bank and Gaza and East Jerusalem. So the Palestinians have to go to the polls under these circumstances. For instance, East Jerusalem has always been a problem for me the last 3 elections. There are about 250,000 Palestinians who live in East Jerusalem, Arabs. And the Israelis and the Palestinians are always squabbling about who it belongs to. And so the Israelis do everything they possibly can to prevent the Palestinians voting, and the Palestinians are determined to vote. So 10 years ago, I went over and negotiated finally, to prevent the election breaking down, a way for the Palestinians to vote. The Israelis said you can't vote in East Jerusalem because you don't have any right to live here. So if you cast a ballot, you're voting as a foreigner. So you put your ballot only in a post office box, and we'll mail it outside East Jerusalem where it can be counted in your own territory. The Palestinians said, no, we live here, we're going to vote in East Jerusalem. So after midnight, when the election was supposed to start in 3 or 4 hours, I negotiated a contract with the Israelis and the Palestinians. We cut the ballot boxes on the corner, a slot. So the Israelis said, you're mailing your ballot, and the Palestinians said, we're voting. And that's where it has been. But out of 250,000 Palestinians, the Israelis, by different means, restrict the number of people to vote to just a few thousand. But with that one exception, the Palestinian elections have been perfect. Thank you for your question.
Carter, as someone who was not alive during your presidency, I was wondering, as a president and also as a human being, what really gave you the initial concern that you had for these human rights issues that eventually resulted in the Carter Center and all the work you've done?
When I left the White House, as I said earlier, I was one of the youngest survivors of the office. And I didn't know what in the world I was going to do with the rest of my life. And I looked at some statistics, and I saw that I had 25 more years of possible active life. And I was deeply in debt. I wrote a book that paid off my debt. We sold our business. We didn't have to sell our farms. And I wanted to take my influence as a president of a great nation and use it in a way that was helpful. But I have to say that I'd had no concept of what the Carter Center would ultimately become. It was all new ground. Nobody had ever done this before. As you know, no other president had ever had an active international life after office. And so we were scrambling to see what could possibly be done. And we have found that the things that we do at the Carter Center have never been a sacrifice. They are adventures, and they are unpredictable, and they're exciting, and they're challenging, and they're gratifying, and they are you know, as I mentioned the word in the movie, that they are filled with love. There's a bonding that takes place between all of us at the Carter Center and the people in those countries that are almost completely ignored. And it's one of the most wonderful things that's ever happened. When I passed my 70th birthday, I was interviewed by Barbara Walters, and she said, look, when you were a young officer, you were one of the most successful naval officers. You went to the nuclear submarine program immediately, and then you ran for office, and you've been, you know, state senator and governor. What's the best time of your life? And I said, this time. Since I left the White House, has been the best time of my life. It's been the most enjoyable and exciting and adventurous and gratifying. So it's not a sacrifice. And I think that everybody that helps with the Carter Center, where you give $5 a month or whatever you can do, should feel that you are a partner in everything we do. And that's why I'm so grateful for what John Moores has done and what so many people have done to help us. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. President. I'm curious if you could explain the evolution of the Carter Center's protocol for how you go about executing your programs, primarily fighting the urge of being an American and running a telethon and writing checks, but rather executing your plans and getting to the point where you understand one foreigner versus a group of Americans and how that evolution took place from when you left office to where you are today, because it sounds to be a very tangible, functional thing.
Well, I mentioned earlier that my first concept was to recreate a little baby Camp David, because I had seen that the great influence of an incumbent president of the United States could bring peace between Israel and Egypt when they had been at war 4 times in 25 years, and they despised each other. And I used my influence there, and not a single word of that peace treaty has ever been violated by either side. So that was my original concept. And then I had a man who worked for me, Dr. Peter Bourne, who was in charge of my drug program when I was governor. At that time, heroin was the only real serious problem. And then he was in charge of my drug program for the entire world when I was president. And when we left the White House, he became the Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations. And since he was a psychiatrist and a doctor, they put him in charge of a decade of water, that is, drinking water. And he began to explore around the world to see what filthy water caused. So he came to the Carter Center one day with a report on guinea worm. Well, I never had heard of it. Nobody there had ever heard of it. And he showed some slides of guinea worms, and I decided on the spur of the moment, why don't the Carter Center try to do something about this disease? And so that's how we got involved, and that's how we really began to go into the interior of Africa and Asia. We went into 23,600 villages. That's a lot of villages, and in 21 different countries. 3 of them were in Asia, India, Pakistan, and Yemen. And the rest of them were sub-Saharan Africa. But we knew that in order to eradicate guinea worm, we had to go into every village, or train people to do so, and tell them this is what causes guinea worm, drinking water out of your local pond, and this is what you do to prevent it. Pour the water through a filter cloth, or treat the pond with some pesticide. And so we began to be immersed in that area. And then we got to see that as we went in guinea worm villages, some of them had the other diseases that we've discussed, and so we just kind of expanded there. And I found I wasn't surprised. When I went to 2 African villages, 2 African nations when I was president. I went to Liberia and I went to Nigeria. But when I began to go to these African countries that I didn't know anything about when I was president, I saw that when I arrived at the airport, quite often it was a transforming experience for that country. They had never had the Queen of England or the President of the United States come, and I was surprised that, although I was a former president, that it made a major impact, and they were so eager to do anything I asked them to do. And if I said, I want you to be my partner in doing this, they were overwhelmed with excitement and gratitude. I didn't have to talk them into it. They were so eager to improve the quality of life of their own people. So that's how the Carter Center, step by step, has become, I think, so ambitious and also, to be crass about, so successful.
Thank you.
Sure.
And this will have to be the last question. And I must say, my mother told me never correct a president, a former president, but I'm going to do it anyway. The work that President Carter does is hard. He may think of it as an adventure, but normal human beings would see it as flat hard.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Mr. President. I feel very honored to be able to ask you this question. As you know, for villagers or citizens of the countries you visit, suffering from a disability such as an amputated leg can be very debilitating. Does
Yes.
the Carter Center have any future plans for helping such citizens with their disabilities, such as distributing wheelchairs?
No, we don't have any plans to do that. That's a very notable thing for anyone to do. But that specific project is something that we have not considered, because what we're going to do aside from that, which you already know, is to keep people from becoming blind and try to distribute bed nets to keep people from dying with malaria rather than to treat people that are handicapped. One thing that we do, though, is to teach the people who are on the verge of becoming blind people how to survive afterwards. And the major statue at the Carter Center is a little boy who might be 8 years old holding one end of a stick, and his father or grandfather behind him is holding the other end of a stick. His father or grandfather is blind. And we go into a lot of villages in Africa where onchocerciasis, river blindness, or trachoma has stricken the people. And you'll see early in the morning these little small children who are elementary school kids, and they're seeing eye children. And they'll have sometimes 4 different adults behind them, each one holding the end of a stick because they can't see where they're going. And this little child is taking them to a water hole to get some drinking water, or taking them to the local market or something of that kind. But to deal with buying wheelchairs and distribute them, the answer to your question is no. We try to do other things. So.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Chancellor Fox, could I ask you to come up?
President Carter, very rarely do we have the opportunity to see a hero in the flesh. Even rarer is the opportunity to see someone who has been able to inspire an entire generation and maybe to save a continent. So on behalf of the students, the faculty, the staff of the University of California, San Diego, I thank you for the visit and for the inspiration. Thank you so very much.